So just to recap, why is value added important and how does it help us with school self-evaluation? Well, value added is a performance measure that analyzes attainment for each student compared to students with similar starting points. And in this case, we're using CAT4 test scores as that starting point. And using those two data points, we're able to measure the impact that schools have on students' learning, taking into account both the start point and the end point. And at the end of the day, value added is a fairer and a more accurate measure of student performance and school effectiveness. When we're measuring value-added performance in this service, the starting point is a CAT score that will either have been taken in year 7 or year 9 there. And then obviously you can use those CAT scores to estimate where students will get to at the end of their GCSE courses. We can estimate the likely outcome for each student based on their CAT score. And some students will meet their expectations. Some students will have higher results than expected, and we would say that's a positive value-added score. And some students will have lower results than expected, and we would say that would be a negative value-added score. What that looks like when we're actually analysing the results in the service, the first point that's worth making is that we need to calculate a point score for every student. Many international schools now are using a mix of the new 9-to-1 GCSEs and as well as A*G IGCSEs. And so we need to have a point score that can put those two grading schemes together. And you can see the table on the left-hand side here that allocates a point score for each of the A*G grades. As the 9-to-1 grades have a 9-to-1 point score as well. Just a very simple example on the table on the right here. If we imagine a school that has three students with different starting points, different CAT scores, we can see for each student we have an estimated result and an actual result. And if we just take the three students in turn, the first student has a slightly lower CAT score, just below average. Their estimated result is 4.3. Their actual result is a grade B, 5.5. So they end up with a positive value-added score. Their actual result is higher than their estimate. Student B has slightly higher attainment from their CAT test, so 106, slightly above average. They obviously have a higher estimate. They also have a grade B, 5.5, so still end up with a positive value-added score. And then finally, we've got student C, who has a much higher CAT score, 126. Their estimate is 7.6, as you can see there. They achieve a grade A, which is given 7 points, and actually their value added is negative. Their result is slightly lower than their estimated result. So we perform that calculation for each student, and then the school's value-added score is simply an average of those individual value-added scores for each student. And that's how we calculate value-added performance. And we can do that calculation for individual subjects. We can do it also for overall performance. Just for interest, these are the factors that we include in our value-added model. So when we're creating an estimate for each student, we're taking into account each of the individual batteries from the CAT4 test, as you can see there, as well as the overall mean score. And we also take into account gender and the month of birth. And those two final factors adjust the estimates as well as the CAT4 scores. So all of those factors are included to produce an estimate for each student. So let's go on now and have a quick look at some of the reports that I know many of you will be familiar with as you're using the service at the moment, but it's worth just briefly looking at some of the highlights as we go through there. So just to remind you, there are two sets of dashboards available for schools. There is a school performance dashboard, which looks at overall school performance. And then there's a subject dashboard, which drills down to look at individual subjects at GCSE and IGCSE. Starting first with the school dashboard, we provide a really useful summary, I think, of the data that's included in the dashboard. So how many students are included in the analysis? How many students do we have matched CAT data? And you can see in this example, 90% of the students we've been able to match CAT4 data to their GCSEs. How many entries on average are there for the school? And this information matches your expected number of students. So when you upload data and then see the reports for the first time, this table is really helpful in just making sure that you've got the right number of students, the right number of entries, and so on. On the right-hand side here, you can see the CAT scores for this cohort. Again, useful to see the context and the prior attainment of each cohort that you've got reports for, and we're showing the individual batteries again. Particularly interesting to see the difference between verbal and non-verbal there. For many international schools, that verbal deficit, which we've got highlighted at the bottom there, the verbal and the non-verbal will be two elements of CAT that will be useful for you. Moving on to looking at attainment and value added, the rest of that sort of summary dashboard focuses on attainment on the left-hand side, so your school's results, and we pull out a number of measures there. You can see a sort of overall indicator looking at the percentage of students getting grade 4 or grade C and above, including English and Maths, 5 of those qualifications. We have an average grade for GCSE for English and Maths. And it's important to remember that that average grade is using that points system that I referred to earlier. So it's a 9-to-1 scale that is able to map the A-star to GCSEs onto that. So you've got attainment on the left there. So in this case, the school's average attainment is around about a grade 5. So between a grade C and a grade B if you're on the A-star to GCSEs. On the right-hand side, we have the value-added score. So you can see here for this school, there's a positive value-added score, plus 0.57 overall. So, and that is pretty consistent. It's positive for overall performance and also for English and also for Maths. And when you look at a value-added score, plus 0.5 can be sort of equated to around about half a grade. That's a useful way of thinking about that value-added score. The charts at the bottom of that school summary dashboard are showing the same data. The useful addition here is you can actually compare your school's performance to some benchmarks. And on these reports, we provide 2 benchmarks for you. The black dotted line is the average for schools in England, and you can see that both attainment and for the value added on the right hand side. The grey line, the sort of other line, is the average for international schools. So that is the average for the cohort of schools that are using our value added service, and you can see that the average for international schools is slightly higher, both for attainment and value-added progress. So it's a useful way of schools being able to compare their performance both to schools in the UK, in England, and also to other international schools. Moving on to some other dashboards that are available for schools. The next dashboard looks at student groups. So it's drilling down now from that overall performance and giving you the ability to look at your reports and your analysis by boys and girls. So how are boys and girls performing in your school? And we also break down performance by CAT ability groups. And we use the sort of standard groupings there of students with average CAT scores or high or low there. And at the very bottom, we also do a grouping by the verbal ability score for students, and particularly that one is of interest for students that are coming in with lower verbal ability scores as they're acquiring English as a second language. And again, you've got all the attainment there in the middle of that table and value-added scores. The interesting thing you'll be looking at here is looking at gaps between pupils. So for example, we can see in this school, attainment for girls is higher than it is for boys, quite a big difference there. And similarly, value-added scores are higher for girls than boys. So a question perhaps for this school to consider is, what can we do to improve the performance of boys to bring that up to the level of girls, particularly for value added. Similarly, when we look at ability groups, we can see that the higher ability pupils and pupils with sort of average ability have positive value added scores, but there's a group of students with lower ability using the CAT data that actually have a negative value added score. So again, that would be an area for focus for the school as they're thinking about their school improvement plans. In all the reports in the value-added service, you can drill right down to the underlying pupil data, which is important to drill below that summary analysis, and we do that in a number of ways. There's a table that has all of the pupil results and value-added available for you. Many teachers like data in a scatterplot, and on this particular scatterplot, we're plotting on the axis at the bottom the CAT score for students, and on the y-axis we're plotting the value-added score. So students above the 0 line have a positive value-added score. Their results are better than expected, and students below the line have a negative value-added score. And using the system, the Scatterplot's interactive, so if you hover over any student, you can see the student's name, and that will help you look at either outliers or students that have performed particularly well or not so well in value-added terms. One new report that will be coming online later on this term is a trend analysis. So it's the same data, it's the same analysis, but for schools that have submitted data for multiple years, you'll be interested in looking at how your performance compares over time. Are there trends? Are there patterns? So in this case, we've got a school with 3 years worth of data for GCSE and Year 11, and the school can then look at attainment over time and look at their value-added performance over time. So obviously to get access to the trend reports, you will need to think about submitting data not just, say, for 2019, but also submit your GCSE results for previous years. And I'll remind you how you can upload your data in a minute. And as well as having a table there, we will show that trend analysis on a chart. So you've got some attainment here for the school, again, compared to the England and international benchmarks, and similarly for value-added performance as well. Just to sort of finish that overview of the school reports, the second set of reports look at subject performance. So it's drilling down from overall performance down to individual subjects. And we provide attainment for all of the GCSEs that are being taken in your school, and we provide value added for a group of 21 GCSE or IGCSE subjects. You can see that list on the right hand side here. So these are subjects with bigger areas that allow us to look at value added performance across all the students in schools in both the UK and international schools. The format of the reports is fairly straightforward and consistent with what we've already seen. So there's a table here that shows you all of your GCSE subjects for a particular year. You can see how many students sat the GCSE for each subject. You can see how many students have matched CAT results there. And then you've got 3 attainment indicators: the percentage of students getting grade 7 or grade A and above, the percentage of students getting grade 4 or grade C and above, the average grade, and then on the far right, the value-added scores. So again, subjects with a positive value-added score are where students are performing better than we expected. Students with subjects with a negative value-added score, for example, art and design here, are subjects where results are lower than we would expect. And as with the whole of this system, if you wanted to sort any of these columns on the online system, you can simply click on the sort button at the top of the table to sort by either attainment or entries or value added. Finally, the last report to show you here is that same data, but putting it on a chart, and teachers again and schools find this very useful. So we're simply ranking your subjects by attainment, showing you subjects with the highest attainment down to the lowest attainment on the left-hand side here. The black dotted line here is showing you the average attainment for your school. So it's a very useful way of looking at sort of in-school variation. Are there subjects with higher or lower attainment in your school? And on the right-hand side, we have the same sort of table, but this time we're ranking your school's subjects by value added. So the subjects at the top are the subjects where you have the highest value added performance. In this case, students are making a positive value added progress, and down at the bottom you've got subjects where students' results and value added are below expectations. And we use some simple colouring there to highlight positive and negative value added for you. So that's the first section, just giving you a very brief overview of the value-added reports that are available, and hopefully many of you are using the service and have access to those reports. Just a brief reminder about how you submit your value-added data. The data you need to provide is the GCSE results data. If you haven't used the service before, the first stage is to contact GL using that email address there, and they will be able to get you set up. We will give you access to a secure website to upload your GCSE results. And as I said earlier, you can upload your GCSEs for the current result year, so obviously 2019 results from the summer. But if you want to, you can also upload your results from previous years, from 2017 and 2018. And that will be particularly useful if you're interested in accessing the trend report that we will be releasing later on this term. In terms of your CAT data, FFT and GL will work together. You will, as part of the service, you're giving us permission to actually link your GCSE and CAT data together. So you don't need to actually provide us with your CAT data again. We have that already in the systems here. Once you've uploaded your data, it's normally a couple of weeks where we're then able to get your reports ready for you to use. Template for uploading your data is fairly straightforward. It's a spreadsheet where you submit your pupils on each row, and on the right-hand side, you need to provide the subjects that are being taken by your students. And there's a list of subject codes and subjects which are helpful for you to populate those columns, which are obviously using the subjects that are appropriate and relevant for your school. So that's the template to use, and most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with that. So for the last sort of 10 minutes, we're going to move on to looking at some of the trends that we can now see emerging from the schools using the value-added service. As I say, we've got data now for over 100 schools, and using that data, we can see some interesting trends and patterns emerging for schools. This first table here is just showing the sort of attainment, both in terms of CAT scores and also GCSE attainment for the schools using the service. The line at the top is the sort of summary for all international schools, and then we've broken it down by 4 geographical regions, and you can see those 4 regions there. It's interesting to note that the CAT scores on average for international schools are slightly higher than for schools in the UK. So the average for schools in the UK would be 100, but the CAT scores for international schools on average are a bit higher, particularly in Asia and Europe. The schools in the Middle East have CAT scores that are perhaps more in line with schools in the UK. The other interesting point, which I've mentioned already, is the difference between the verbal CAT score and the non-verbal CAT score, and that's going to be interesting for many schools, and particularly students for whom English is a second language. You can see there's quite a big difference in most regions, actually more pronounced there for the schools in Asia and Europe. Big differences in their verbal and non-verbal CAT scores. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the benchmark for attainment for international schools. And again, you can see obviously different levels of attainment for different regions. Again, that attainment is higher, particularly on the average grade, than for the schools in the UK. If we add value added into that analysis on this next table, you can see a really encouraging sort of trend there for international schools. So on average, international schools have a higher value added score or a positive value added score when compared to schools in the UK. Again, if this analysis was being shown for UK schools, the value added score would be 0. So on average, there are 50% of schools above or below average. For international schools, on average, international schools have a positive value-added score, and it's a big score actually. So a value-added score of +1 is essentially saying that students on average are achieving 1 grade higher in their GCSEs in international schools than similar students in the UK. And you can see there are some differences across regions, which you'll be interested to sort of compare your school to a region that's most appropriate for you. You can see also that the gains are slightly higher in English than they are in maths, which perhaps isn't surprising, that if students are, particularly with English as a second language, they are acquiring English skills throughout their time at an international school and making higher value-added gains there. It's always interesting to look at how boys and girls compare, no matter where you go in the world. There are normally interesting comparisons to be made between the performance of boys and girls. And here you can see that girls have a slightly higher attainment than boys, particularly overall, and in English. In maths, actually, boys and girls have a very similar attainment, and that pattern matches the pattern we see for attainment for boys and girls in England. Interestingly, when we look at value-added performance, it slightly reverses, that actually the boys have slightly higher value-added performance than girls. And actually that is a slightly different trend to the UK, where if we looked at the value-added performance of boys and girls, we would find that girls on average have slightly higher value-added scores than boys. I've just included this table here, which will be interesting for you to take away and see that same gender split, but you'll be able to see that for the particular region that you're located in. So be useful to compare your performance in your school for boys and for girls, both for attainment and value added, compared to the benchmark for whichever region your school is located in. just to sort of show you that, and I think, you know, those working in international schools know this, but international schools do have quite a wide range of sort of contexts. There are some international schools where students are arriving with quite high ability on average. There are other schools where the ability range is very wide ranging. And as you can see here, there are some schools where students are arriving with lower than average ability. And all we've done here on this scatter plot, it's a bit like the pupil scatter plot we looked at earlier. We're just showing it for a range of the international schools involved in this service. So at the bottom there, you can see the CAT score for different schools, and you can see the value added score on the vertical axis. The encouraging thing is that almost all international schools have positive value added progress, and that value added progress can be achieved by schools with cohorts that have average ability, so CAT scores around 100, lower ability as well as high ability cohorts. And you can see the sort of spread of schools in different regions of the world there. Finally, the last few slides in this this webinar, we're just going to drill down and have a look at the subject data we have. You can see here we have entries data for over 13,000 students. This first table is just interesting really to see, well, what subjects are students studying in international schools? And it's no surprise that most students take English and maths, GCSE. Those are the core subjects that most students will be taking in most international schools. But interesting to see the sort of numbers of entries for, we picked out, I think, the top 30 GCSEs here. So sciences, the sort of humanities, and you can see the list of subjects. And obviously you're thinking about your curriculum offer in your school. This will be interesting to see, well, what do students study in international schools. The other interesting bit of information here is the average CAT score for students taking each subject. So for example, it's interesting to see their English literature. The students doing English literature tend to have a higher CAT score than those that are doing English language. All students are pretty much doing English language, and then perhaps some of the students with higher ability are doing English literature. Similarly, you've got some subjects that are being taken by students with lower CAT scores, for example, accounting GCSE down there towards the bottom. This next table looks at the same list of subjects, but this time we're ranking it by attainment. Which subjects are students achieving the highest results, the highest grades across the group of international schools, and in which subjects are students achieving the lower results. Probably not surprising to see that actually some of the modern foreign languages, so Chinese, Spanish and Arabic up there, have some of the higher performance, and that may well be partly down to students who are native speakers taking those subjects. But interesting, again, for you to sort of compare the subjects that have higher or lower attainment in your school to the trends for international schools in service. And then the final slide here, looking at the same sort of table, but this time looking at value added performance. So in which subjects are students making the biggest value added gains? Their results are much higher than expected, and in which subjects are the value added gains lower? And as we've talked about already, overall, students are making positive value added across the range of all of their subjects, but you can see there are some subjects where students are making phenomenal sort of progress, really. So, for example, combined science up the top there, again, the languages where students are making much higher value-added gains, and also the subjects where perhaps value-added performance isn't as high. But it's important to remember that in all of these subjects, students are making positive value-added gains. Last one just pulls a few of those bits of data together. So you can see here, this is just looking again at that list of subjects, but we've just put it on a scatter plot. So you can see here the average CAT scores for students doing different subjects and the average value-added scores. So again, those subjects with very high value-added scores, combined science, some of the languages over here on the right, computer science. But interesting to note that students have very different starting points. So for example, computer science with a very high value-added score over on the left is being taken by students who have a lower CAT score of 102, compared to some of the subjects over on the right are subjects where students are achieving high value-added scores, but actually they're being taken by students that on average have higher CAT scores. So this will be interesting again to sort of compare your curriculum and the CAT scores of pupils taking each GCSE subject compared to the pattern for all international schools. So that's the end of the formal presentation part of this section. And as you can see there, clearly if you have any questions about submitting your data and the reports at any time, you can contact us using the value-added email address there. But I will hand back to Andrew now to see if there are any questions.